So, welcome everyone. This is the next edition of Coaching Club, and I'm Mark Dayton. I'm the Who Coach, and I'm happy to be with you on this session. And this quarter, we are going through the book, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. As I mentioned in my earlier presentations, this was a life changer for me. Anyone who has not read this book is missing a real opportunity. And the life coach that I was working with at the time, after our first few sessions, he said, "Mark, you really need to read that book." And I said, "Okay." I wrote it down in my notes. And then next week I came back and he said, "Did you read the book?" Oh, no, I didn't read the book. You really need to read the book. So I wrote it down again. And I was looking back. I actually wrote it down about 4 or 5 times, I think, before I finally got it. But I finally got it, and it has some great concepts. Some that were very foundational and life-changing for me. So we're going through the book one chapter at a time, and we are now in the third month on the third agreement. And so we will be discussing don't make assumptions today. That's the third agreement. Has anybody had a chance to read the book of this chapter? Are you familiar with it?
Yes, I read it.
Okay. So I'm not going to rehash much of what's in the book. I hope we can take it to the next level and break some new ground here with some new ideas. Would love to have you chime in. So I've got some slides here I'm going to share. We'll get this going right here. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. So third agreement is don't make assumptions. Let me just ask a real fundamental basic question. So what's the problem with making assumptions?
If you break that word assumption, you make something of me and you.
That's one that I've always appreciated. That's very telling, isn't it? So why is that about assumptions? Why are they so damaging?
Because they're not the truth.
Okay. So often the assumptions we make are just stuff we make up in our heads. And so if we're basing relationships and communications and interactions on stuff that is only in our minds and isn't really true and it isn't based in reality, then we're headed for a lot of heartache and upset in our relationships. In the book, Reese makes this statement. So he says, "This is the third agreement. Don't make assumptions." And I'm going to read this. This is on page 73. He says, "Without making assumptions, our world becomes impeccable. Our word becomes impeccable. If all humans could communicate in this way, there would be no wars, no violence, no misunderstandings. All human problems would be resolved." That's a pretty bold statement. And so that's really all I wanted to say today was that, don't make assumptions. And if you don't make assumptions, then we're just going to resolve all the problems out there out there in the world. Any questions?
It makes you think that maybe we make a lot more assumptions than we think.
Good. I'm glad I got a reaction out of that. We must make a ton of assumptions, huh? In fact, I think he's even making an assumption here that if everybody did it, that all the problems would go away, which to me is a pretty big assumption in and of itself. But that said, I think we're all agreed that assumptions are making assumptions is going to be a problem for us and a challenge for us in our lives. So my next question when I was thinking about this was, well, why do we as human beings tend to make so many assumptions? What is it about us that, we create tons and tons of assumptions? And as I thought about it, I really believe that as humans, we are what I call meaning-making beings. Our minds, we are wired to try to make sense and make meaning out of everything in our environment, everything that comes into our lives. We try to make meaning out of it and find reasons for why things are as they are. And there are tons and tons of questions that don't have answers in our lives. And because we are meaning-making beings, our subconscious has to have an answer for those questions, or we just feel we feel unsafe, we feel unbalanced. And so our minds, our beautiful, wonderful, powerful self-conscious just goes ahead and makes up an answer for all those questions. And it's based on the best information that we have. It's based on the way we see life, what we understand. And sometimes those assumptions are reasonable, but a lot of times they are not reasonable. They're not true. They're just not based in truth, as we've said. So, on the one hand, we can say, well, just don't make assumptions. But as human beings, we're going to make assumptions. That's just the way we're wired. And it's the way we have to live our lives. So I want to propose a different take on this. And while I agree that don't make assumptions is a, a wonderful goal and an aspiration for us, I want to see if we can make it a little more practical. And I'm going to suggest that maybe we discuss how we manage our assumptions rather than just don't make assumptions, because we're going to make assumptions in everything we do. We're going to make assumptions, and then we're going to be faced with, okay, so I'm dealing with these assumptions. Now what? How do I deal with that, and how do I manage it? And I also think there's an aspect of it where we can tend to really beat ourselves up, and in retrospect go, oh, if I just wouldn't have made that assumption, I wouldn't have gotten into that argument, we wouldn't have had that fight, I wouldn't have lost that money, I mean, whatever it was. And we can really get down on ourselves and pick up that stick and really beat ourselves. So I'd like to kind of flip that and say, well, what if we just go into this assuming that we are going to make assumptions, and we'll try to manage that and not make assumptions consciously as much as we can. But our real challenge is, how do we manage the assumptions that we're going to be facing as we go into our experiences? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Any thoughts, any reactions to that?
I like the part about don't beat yourself up.
Okay. Yeah, I tend to be a champion at that, and it's not very helpful. So we can just love ourselves and keep focused on, so okay, here's where I am. What do I do about it? So I'm gonna share my thoughts on 5 practical ways to manage our assumptions. Some of these are in the book, and some of these are ones that I've come across that I think might be helpful for us. So let's just go through these. Number 1 is, I call it watch for triggers. And if we're trying to manage our assumptions, there are often things that trigger us that if we step back and look at them, we will recognize that the upset, whatever the emotions are that we're dealing with are probably based on a bunch of assumptions that aren't true. But if we get triggered and we don't step back and look at that as a possible window into the assumptions that it's based on, we often will just dive headlong into the fray and get stuck in our stories, get stuck in our victim stance, get stuck in defending our position or whatever, without really stepping back and asking the question, okay, I'm really upset. This was a big blow up, or this was a big challenge for me, or whatever. But are there some assumptions here that I'm basing my reaction on that just aren't true? And if that's the case, then what can I do about it? So that's my first my first suggestion is that watch for those triggers as windows into the fact that maybe that's an opportunity to explore the foundation for what's going on there, and really looking at, oh, am I basing this on assumptions that just aren't true? Number two, if we notice that we have questions, and like I said earlier, we are meaning-making beings, so if there are questions in our minds, then that's again a clue that we should be thinking about asking questions. Before we do and say anything else is to ask questions. That's one of the best ways to get past untrue assumptions, is just to ask questions. People may, we make a lot of assumptions about what people's motives are, or what they were thinking, or why they were doing things. And we get this stuff running around in our heads about, oh, why would they say that to me? Or I can't believe that they would do that, or, all of those kinds of things. But before we react and before we do anything, the quickest path to getting to the bottom of it is ask questions. Just ask them, what are you feeling? Or why did you do that? Or help me understand what's going on here. And if we ask the questions, then we can find out. We can really test the validity of our assumptions and really get to the bottom of what's going on. Any thoughts on that?
Sometimes I think I'm programmed not to ask questions because I'll be telling somebody a story about something that happened, and then they'll ask questions. And they'll be like, oh, well, how did that person react after that? And I realize, oh my goodness, I didn't think to ask that. It happens over and over. So I know I need to get better at asking questions.
So what do you do to stay aware of that and to maybe improve that?
Good question, because I don't know. It's not my first thought. My first thought is not to ask questions. I generally just listen. And I have gotten a lot of information just listening. Sometimes people tell me things they never would have said if I would have asked the question. So there is some good in it, but I do want myself to ask more questions.
That's good. That's really good. You seem to be a really great listener, actually. I've noticed that in you, that you're very, very attentive and very good at listening.
Thank you. When I worked at the newspaper, a really good interview would be when I get to some point and I just let him talk and talk and talk. And then I'd get to this point where they had this look on their face. And the look was, I can't believe I just told her that. And then when I saw that look, I'd circle whatever it was they just said. And I'd know that is the point of the story right there.
That's good. Body language gave it away.
Mm. I just compliment myself and I'd say, you got there not by asking questions. You got there by them forgetting you were a reporter.
That is way too funny. That's great. Oh, hang on. I'm sorry. I just kicked my plug out of my computer. I got to plug it back in. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, well, it is a skill and it is a challenge and it's sometimes intimidating, but particularly if we find ourselves embroiled in defending our position or going back and forth and just feeling like we're spinning our wheels or we're stuck in the mud with a relationship, maybe it's a time to step back and question it a little bit and really maybe pick that person's brain a little bit and find out where they're at and where they're coming from. Okay, next one. This is another one that he brings out in the book, which I think is a really great one. And this is a real challenge for me. And that is ask for what you want. So not only ask questions and find out what that other person wants, but also, or where they're coming from, but also have the courage to ask for what we want. Because if we're not clear with what our needs are and what our expectations are in a relationship, then the other person is going to make assumptions about us. And this is where, I mean, I talk to my friends who are marriage counselors and that kind of thing. And this is where so many problems come up, where a spouse will say, well, I don't know how you could possibly do that because you should have just known that that would upset me, or you should have known that that's what I wanted and not this. And the assumption is, well, you're living with me and we know each other well, so you should just intrinsically know what I need and what I want. And we're making a huge assumption that basically that I can read your mind, right? And so if in the absence of information, our minds are going to make up an assumption about that relationship or about that situation and get us into trouble. So to help that person, maybe the person isn't asking questions, but if we actually ask for what we want, let them know where we're coming from, that can help eliminate a lot of the assumptions that would otherwise have been made about what our desires are and where we're coming from and what we need. Thoughts on that one?
Well, I think it also tells you that you're in a bad relationship when you know that you can't ask for what you want, because if you do, that's a guarantee that you won't get it.
Say that again?
Well, I had a really bad relationship with my husband, so I never dared ask for what I wanted. Because if he knew what I wanted, then I wouldn't get it for sure. So if
Oh,
I never said, then there was a chance I would get it. But if I asked for it, then I knew for sure that that would for sure never happen.
oh my goodness, because he was so vindictive, huh?
Yes,
He would use it as a way of punishing you.
yes. He was very good at, oh, that's what she wants. And then he'd know what punishment. Yes, you're exactly right.
Wow. That's bad.
So even when I'm with healthy people, I'm still learning how to ask for what I want.
Okay. Yeah.
When people do give me what I want, it's difficult for me deal. This guy that helped me over the weekend and moved a bunch of stuff. I couldn't keep myself from crying, and I tried to hide it from him, but he kept noticing. So I
Mhm.
was embarrassed. But it was because I was so grateful.
Oh, that's beautiful. But you did find the courage to ask.
Not really. He's beat it out of me what I really needed.
Hmm. So he
I did,
asked questions.
yeah, I did have the courage to accept. Accepting was as much as I could do. I didn't do good at asking, but I did well at accepting.
That's a good first step. That's a good step. Well, good. And and even for people who maybe haven't had the same type of trauma that you have had or experienced, it still takes courage to ask. And I think as human beings, we somehow feel like we're imposing, or we shouldn't be greedy that way, or whatever our minds assume and make up. When in reality, it's very helpful and useful for others if we can be clear about our needs and our expectations to to keep those lines open. Okay, number 4, I call this a maturity check. And I've noticed with it's kind of interesting. I have young grandchildren around now, and when they come over, they get into their squabbles sometimes, and or with their friends. And a lot of these kids are under age 5 or 6, and they're they're behaving as children. It's nothing out of the usual, or it's not bad, or a problem. It's just that they're behaving as 6-year-olds. But the funny thing is, I notice when I've worked with people who are into squabbles and disagreements and problems with their relationships, um, they're often acting like 6-year-olds. If you step way back, they're adult problems, but the way they're approaching them is, well, you started it and you said this, and if you wouldn't have said that, and oh yeah, well, and it goes round and round, and they're making assumptions about what the motives of the other person were, or what the outcomes would be, or all of that kind of thing. And I think sometimes if we just step back and look at it and say, is this, am I really being mature in this interaction here? Or are we just acting like a couple of 6-year-olds and kind of duking it out? So just another way of thinking about it, maybe, and step back and say, okay, what's the mature approach here? And if there are still a lot of questions and a lot of disagreements and a lot of hurt feelings and that kind of thing going on, it's a great time to start asking questions again and to get clarity and clarifying information. And the reflective type questions are really powerful. And using the language makes a big difference. And if we say, well, you said, if we use accusatory language, like you said, and this is what you were trying to do, but if we can step back from that a little bit and say, well, it seems to me, or I believe that what is going on, or what you were meaning was such and such. Is that true? Is that where you're coming from? And then people, we give them the space so that they can actually clarify for us where they were really coming from, or what they were really intending for us to understand. So uh, just something to think about as far as maturity. And actually, I'm working on a book right now that is related to maturity. And a big part of maturity is how tuned in we are to the actual truth, to things as they really are. Because if you think about, again, thinking about the extreme case of children, they, they get scared about the monster under their bed, or that somebody's going to steal their candy or whatever. And to them, it's real, but it's not true. And it's just a lack of maturity on their part. But as we grow up and as we become adults, many people just never really grow out of that. And they hold on to their assumptions and the things that they believe are true, and they defend them and live in their own little dream world, and never really grow into maturity of being able to face reality and truth for what it really is. So just another thought there for you. Last one is, I call it the honesty check. And this is another one that is a challenge for many of us, because sometimes we just want something to be true so badly that we ignore the truth and we make assumptions about what it could be. In the book, he talks about something as simple as you see somebody in the mall and they look at you and smile, and you assume, oh, well, they smiled, so that means they like me, and maybe we could have a relationship. And your mind goes to making all these assumptions about what could be. I Looking back on an experience in my business life, um, formed a partnership with a person who was just a brilliant guy, and we had a lot in common. We had some really good synergies and great ideas going, and we decided to do this venture together. But as I was getting into that relationship early on, there was something I knew in my gut that there was something was not right here. And it was one of those things that just didn't smell right, didn't pass the smell check test. But I wanted it so badly because this is such a cool opportunity, and so I started making all these assumptions about, well, I'm just overreacting, and maybe it's not true, and I just wanted it to be true so badly that I ignored what were all the warning signs of what the actual truth was. So, long story short, we got into this, got way down the road, and his true character came out, and everything blew up. It was a big mess, and a real harsh learning experience for me in my life. But as I look back on it, I had that gut check early on, but I didn't want to accept the truth and face the fact that yeah, I want this to be true so badly that I'm actually making stories up about why it's not true, and got myself into trouble. So there's another idea. Any thoughts or insights on that idea?
Well, I've made the same mistake. I
Yeah.
even asked God to do it, and he said no. And I didn't. And then I paid.
I'm sorry you broke up right in the middle of that. Could you say that again?
I even asked God once if I should go to a retreat, and he said no. And I wanted to go to that retreat really bad, so I went anyway. And every time something bad happened, I was like, yep, I knew it.
Yeah, I know that's a hard one. It's really hard when you want to really want something badly, but you know your gut is telling you no, or maybe your inspiration is telling you no, but you just want it so badly that you make up a story, an assumption about why you know you should be following that. So live and learn, huh?
Yes, sir.
So that's my those are my thoughts for tonight. So looping back to his statement at the beginning, if that we could all change the world if we would just not make assumptions, which I think is a wonderful ideal, but not very practical. But if we manage our assumptions and do our best, maybe using some of these tools that we talked about tonight, we may not change the whole world, but we can really change our world and our own relationships and get out of the hell that we often create for ourselves with assumptions that aren't not based in reality. So there you go. That's my thoughts on not making assumptions, the third agreement. Any parting thoughts or ideas before we wrap it up?
I have a question.
Sure.
How come you're so,
I'm sorry, you broke up again. I could hear you.
how come you're so awesome?
Oh, I am just doing my best as one guy here doing what he can. But I love getting on and sharing ideas. It's just highlight of my week.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I like the part about the maturity and when you said like you got to change the way that you you change your language basically. Something I've really been working on, so
Oh,
just
wonderful. Terrific. Good.
but
All
have a
right.
good night, y'all.
Well, thank you all, and go out there and don't make assumptions. And if you do your best to manage them, and I will too. All right.
Thanks for teaching us.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good one.